sweet summer rain, the water of life. Without it, none of our plants would even live. We wouldn't either. Now, it ain't nothing nowadays to see what the weather's going on. We just turn on a radar and we can see what's happening in our area, what's actually happening. Now, predicting it is a different story. But do you ever think that back before they had any of this stuff, how these people predicted the weather, lived out in the rural areas in these mountains? But they could do it. Before they had a telephone, any kind of communications to tell each other, even before newspapers, way before radio, didn't have no kind of communications, radios, telephones, or even the television, way before that. A lot of people in our generations just take this for granted. But these old people know what they was doing. They knowed all about it. And they went by an old farmer's almanac, and we still do today. This is how we planted. This is when the best times of the moon phases and stuff to put your crops in the ground, when to plant, when not to plant, so they could get the best yield out of their crops at the end of the season. And they went by this a lot. This is the way of life for these people. And these old mountains, they learn a lot of other things. Now here's an old almanac, far back as I could find, by Benjamin Franklin. He put them out when he was first real young, printing. Now these are old ones. The peoples went by this, and a lot of other ones too. Now man started out, back in the Bible days, trying to figure out the weather so they could raise their crops. They had none of this stuff. They learned it by science. They just learned by God-given signs that was given to them in nature to know what the weather was going to do. And I'm going to give you some of the signs. Signs of the animals, signs of the plants, signs of the insects, signs of fire, signs of just the weather, and signs of winter, so they could predict what was coming in the season ahead, or a couple seasons down the road. Now they learned these signs over time, generation after generation. They would observe things in nature that they noticed things would happen. If certain things was happening in nature, that down the road this would happen. Now this ain't superstition. These are just signs of nature. No, nothing. It's just predicting the weather and the signs, that God-given signs that was given to them in nature, and they learned them over time and passed them down generation after generation. And no, they're not exact, but they're pretty close. And you could really compare them to today's weather forecast, and they're probably just as close as they are, 70-80% right. But that's just the way it was. So I'm going to share with you in these lists. Well, we'll start off with the animals, how they predicted weather by the animals. Now keep in mind, these are just old tales of how the old people back in the days used to predict the weather just by signs of nature. So we'll get started here. All right, they predicted it would be a bad winter if the squirrels was gathering nuts earlier more than usual, and their tails got more bushier than they normally do, and they'd build their nest low to the ground in the trees instead of way up in them. That was a sign it was going to be a bad winter. And the old muskrats build their houses. They build them big to protect them out of the cold weather, they say. And beaver lodges, they had more logs on them than usual. And on the north side of the beaver dam, they'd cover it with more sticks than they would on the south side to keep the north cold air off of them. Now that's just what they're saying. and fur on the animals is thicker than usual. That'd be cattle in the field or wildlife, deer, cows. They'd notice that the fur was real thick, that they would be trying to stay warmer because the cold weather is going to be a bad winter. And the wild hogs and stuff would gather sticks and straws instead of just laying on the ground and stuff, make them a bed to keep them warm. That was predicting cold weather. And the crows would gather together more than usual, closer together. That was predicting cold weather. And when an old hoot owl would call late in the fall, that was predicting a cold winter. And the screech owls would sound like a woman crying more than they normally do. That was a sign of bad weather. And the birds would huddle together on the ground or flock together early, migrating earlier than usual. That was a sign of bad weather. And if you heard an old hoot owl on the mountain, they'd say, winter's coming soon. Better put your boots on. Gonna be a deep snow coming. And another one is, the last one, they say, birds eat up all the berries early, more than usual. They eat them up anyway, but they would eat them up a lot quicker than they normally do. Now that was just some of them. There's still plenty of them out there. So that's forecasting by the animals. Now next up is predicting or forecasting a bad winter by plants. First up, if you see blackberry blooms are really heavy, more than usual, that's a sign of a bad winter. And if carrots grow deeper into the ground, that's a sign of a bad winter. And if grapes and cuckleberries and apples mature early, that's a sign of a bad winter. And sweet potatoes have a tougher skin, that's a bad sign. And onions grow more layers on them than they normally do, that's a sign of a bad winter. And trees are laden with green leaves late in the fall, that's a sign of a bad winter. Of course, oaks are the last tree to turn color and lose their leaves, and that's late in the fall. So I've always known that true, but that's like that every year. And the crops of a holly and dogwood berries is heavier than normal, that's a sign of a bad winter. And hickory nuts have a heavy shell on them, that's a sign of a bad winter. There's heavy crop of berries, acorns, pine cones, that goes for hickory nuts, that goes for acorns and all that stuff. If there's a heavier crop than usual, that's usually a sign of a bad winter. And the old persimmon seeds, if you cut them open, they show a fork, a spoon, or a knife. That predicts what kind of winter you're going to have. And you can see here, you cut them open. This is what they look like. Just if you do this, be careful because you can cut yourself. They're hard to cut open right down the middle. But it shows a fork. It shows you're going to dig your way out. A spoon, you're going to shovel your way out. And a knife, you're going to cut your way out of the snow. That's what I've always been told. So moving on. And if tree bark is heavier than normal on the north side, that's a sign of a bad winter. And if corn shucks on the ear corn grow thicker and tighter than normal around the ends of the ears, that's a sign of a bad winter. And leaves shed before they turn, that's a sign of a bad winter. Or it's just really dry like it's been here. And if moss grows heavier on the trees, especially on the north side, that's a sign of a bad winter. And the old corn ears hang down instead of up like they normally do at 45 degrees, that's a sign of a bad winter. I've heard that one. And if laurel leaves roll up early, that's a sign of a bad winter. And if pine cones open up and drop their seeds early, that's a sign of a bad winter. And another old saying is, the darker the grass is during the summer, the harder the winter is in the cold weather. So there you are by plants. I'm sure there's many more signs, but that's just some of them. All right, next up on the list, we're forecasting or predicting the weather by the insects. They say it'll be a bad winter if the moths hit the screen earlier than normal trying to get in the fall. It's a sign of a bad winter. Or crickets get in your home or in the chimney. They say that's a bad sign of winter. And if ants build their hill higher than normal, that's a sign of bad winter, a deep snow, or really cold weather. And they say hornets and yellow jackets build their nest heavier than normal, closer to the ground than usual, is a sign of a bad winter. Now the yellow jackets are in the ground anywhere. I don't know where that comes from. But the hornet's nests are usually up high, 10, 20 foot off the ground. But if you see them low to the ground, that is a bad sign of a bad winter. And the next one, if the worms are bending up and trying to get into people's houses and abandoned buildings, and you normally don't see that in October, that's a sign of a bad winter. And there are a lot of spiders and frost worms and black bugs in and around the fall. You see them more than usual, a lot more numbers. That's a sign of a bad winter. And the woolly worm, people don't know what a woolly worm is. Well, I'll show you here. They say it's a bad winter if you see them crawling before the first frost. And you can predict what kind of weather it is by the heavy coat, by the order of their color. You can see here, this is one that I filmed last year going across the driveway. This is what they look like, and they're solid black. That's a sign of a bad weather, bad winter. That's what that's a sign of. And here's a little chart you can go by the color code. If they're brown in the middle or brown on the ends, just how the weather's going to be. Bad, then miles up, and then gets bad again or stays bad. This is a little chart that they predicted the weather by. And 3 months after the first katydid begins chirping, there'll be a killer frost. And if they are, that's a bad sign of winter. Now, the old katydids around here, they start around the 4th week of June. So that would make it around the 1st of October around here. So if it was a really bad frost then it's going to be a bad winter. And another sign of bad winter that ain't on this list that I've always noticed in my lifetime, if you have a snow, especially in the southern regions down here in the south, if you have a snow before Halloween, that's usually a sign of a bad winter. I've always noticed that. And then when the butterflies migrate early, that's a sign of a bad winter. Or they gather in great big bunches in the air, winter's coming soon, they say. And another one I throwed on here, that they didn't have that problem back in like we do nowadays, is a stink bug. When a lot of stink bugs gather early around your house trying to get in, that's a sign of a bad winter. Of course, they know what's coming. They seem like just before the weather comes, the bad weather, they know what's coming. That's just nature. So that's a sign by the insects. Now, these old timers used to predict the weather by the way the fire burns. Here's what the list says. When you build a fire outside and it pops all the time, really normal, it's going to be a snow in 3 days. Now, I built a lot of fires outside camping and hunting, and it's popped a lot, but I don't know if that holds to be true. And if a fire traps snow coming down the chimney, traps it, it'll be a deep snow. Now, I don't know about that one. It's just the old timers forecast. It'll be a hard winter if the smoke from the chimney blows downward and settles on the ground. There'll be a snow within 26 days. Now, I have seen it do that. It didn't take 26 days. I've seen it do it in just a few days later. It's just the way the weather forecast. All right, and if it's cloudy and the smoke rises, there's a chance of snow. And there's just what's forecasted by fire. And I'm sure there's a few more of them out there. So that's that list. All right, next up is forecasting the weather. It be rain or winter signs or whatever. But here's some of the old-timers' predictions. All right, within 3 days of the horns of the moon pointing down, it's going to rain. If leaves show their back, that means rain's coming. And that holds true for sure. And if cows are laying down in the pasture, it's a sign of rain. And if there's a ring around the moon, count the stars in the ring, and it will rain within that many days. Now, I haven't never heard of that one. And if the sun sets with the clouds, that's a sign of rain. I've heard that one. Within 3 days, you will see a black snake in a tree. It will rain. I've never heard of that one. That's a new one on me. And if an ant covers its hole to its anthill, that's a sign of rain. And if smoke goes to the ground out of a chimney, that's a sign of rain. And the same time the next day, if the sun shines while it rains, it will rain again the next day at the same time. Now that's a new one on me. And if earthworms come to the surface of the ground, that's a sign it's going to rain. But usually I see them after it rains, they come to the surface. And if birds fly low, that's a sign of rain. And if it hasn't rained in a long time, and it starts before 7 a.m., it'll quit before 11 a.m. in that day. And if it rains on the 3 longest days of the year, there won't be any rain, or any nuts, for animals like hogs to feed on. Now that's a new one on me. And if it rains on Easter Sunday, it will rain every Sunday for the next 7 weeks. Now that's a new one. And if it begins raining on the day of the full moon comes full, it will continue raining until the moon changes quarter. And the weather will be fair. If you hear a screech owl or crickets holler, the temperature will rise. That means the pressure's rising back up after a rain, I guess. Well, there you go on forecasting the weather for rain. Now here's a one on forecasting winter signs. What kind of winter you're going to have. And the first one on the list, 2 frost and lots of rain means weather is coming. Cold weather's coming. And a late frost means a bad winter. And for every fog you see in August, there will be a snowy day in winter. So if you count the fogs that you have in August, you'll have that many number of snows in the winter. I've always heard that one. And at least 3 severe fogs in June or July means a heavy snow. Now that's that one. If it snows cross-legged, it will be a deep snow. That's when it's coming down, going left and right and straight down, sideways. It's going every which way. Like in this picture right here, this little video. It did this a few years ago. It was a big snow too. And if the first snow stays on the ground for more than 3 days, it's waiting for another snow to top it. I've always heard that one. And if it frosts before October, it'll be a bad winter. I've heard that one. Lots of low rolling thunder in the late fall means a bad winter. And I just heard that here the other day when this cold front comes through. So that's not a good sign. A long hot summer means a cold winter. A long cold winter. The hotter the summer, the colder the weather, the winter. I've always heard that. Whatever it is in the summer, it's just a complete opposite in the winter. Or if it's in the winter, it's complete opposite in the summer. I've always heard that one. And the number of days an old moon is that the first snow tells how many snows there will be that winter. So the number of days the moon is that it's full, I guess, is the first snow tells how many snows there will be at that winter. Now, I don't understand that one. That's a new one on me. And the first 12 days after Christmas indicates what each month is in the next year coming will be like. Now, that's a new one on me. That's how they predicted it. And another two ones here that I put in, I added on the list that I've always heard. When it thunders in February, there'll be a frost in that day in April. And another old saying is, I've always heard, if it thunders during the snow, there will be a snow in 14 days later. Now that holds true. I've seen that 2 or 3 times in my lifetime. But there it is, forecasting the winter, what it's going to be like. Well, there you go. There's your list of how the old-timers in these mountains and rural areas across America, the old farmers, how they used to predict the weather before they had any kind of weather forecast or anything, even before they had the almanac. This is just signs that people learned in nature, that way to predict the weather. No, it wasn't 100% accurate, but it was pretty close. I'd say 7 or 8 out of 10, it was pretty real accurate. But that's just how it was. So I want to thank you for watching. Keep an open mind when you see these things. This is just the old times of our old people, times gone by. So I want to thank you for watching. God bless, and I'll see you next time.